Hello, welcome, welcome. I am trying to get in our co-moderators here. Just a moment, Denise. I will bring people up here momentarily. I'm just going to go ahead and get the moderators in here real quick. Oh, can you hear me okay, Joy?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. I'm just going to mute myself real quick and see if I can ping in Kelly. Just a moment.
All right.
There she is. I couldn't even find the ping button. They've changed all the little icons on the bottom. Hi, Kelly.
Hey girls, how are you all today?
Great.
I was, I because we're such good friends, Julie, I wasn't gonna feel some kind of way that you didn't ping me. I was waiting for the
I
ping.
don't even know where it is now. You know what?
I know, and I was like, this whole thing is different. So she probably, hasn't found the ping, but
Yeah,
I was patiently waiting the ping.
I love you. Well, you're here now, so that's all that matters. And
Yes, ma'am.
yes, I'm really excited about this conversation today. Um, Boundaries and boundary setting and boundary violations. Boundaries is just like a really important topic for HSPs. It's something we've discussed in this club many, many times. But I think I wanted to narrow in on a couple of those different types of boundaries, especially having Joy and Kelly here in the room, because they have such great, rich expertise in these areas. And I really want to hear from them and how they communicate about boundaries. And I'm talking in particular emotional boundaries and intellectual boundaries. And what inspired this conversation was actually a podcast that I had listened to that featured Nidra Glover Tawwab, if I'm saying her name correctly. She wrote the book Set Boundaries, Find Peace. And I'm going to link that here on the top as soon as I pass the mic. But in the podcast, what really got me going is just the definition of the different types of boundaries. And then as I did more research around the book and I found different summaries of the book, I kind of just extracted some of the bullet points. And it's just really interesting, I think, as I started to explore what it meant to set boundaries, what boundaries were, what kind of symptoms or state of mind that we fall into when we're not setting boundaries. And then there's like the different types of boundaries. And those different types of boundaries that she outlines in her book is porous or weak boundaries, rigid boundaries, and then also healthy boundaries. So I think there's a lot to chew on today on this topic, and I'm just going to kind of set the stage with some definitions, um, and then I'll just kind of open up the room and let Joy and Kelly contribute in any way that feels natural to them. And then we can have people come up on stage and reflect on what's been shared or ask questions or just contribute in any way that feels comfortable for you. So real quick, we'll go for an hour and a half. If Joy or Kelly need to hop off sooner, just let me know in whatever way that works, so that we can make sure we get everything covered that we need to cover before you need to leave. Um, you are in the Highly Sensitive People Club. This is a club that serves and supports HSPs. It's an HSP community where HSPs can come together to be seen, heard, validated. And then we have conversations that are important to HSPs. And so today we're again talking about boundaries and boundary violations. This was all inspired by a book that is written by Nidra Glover Tawwab, if I'm saying her last name correctly. Set Boundaries, Find Peace. I'm going to go ahead and link it here once I pass over the mic. But just quickly, I'm Julie Staub. I'm an HSP, of course, and an empath. I created this club so that other highly sensitive people could find us. And I have been running rooms weekly here for over a year now. We just celebrated the club's first birthday, which was March 5th. And this is when Clubhouse actually released the ability to create your own club. I had actually applied for a club prior to that in January when it was Clubhouse ancient times, and you didn't have the ability to create a club. And it was really difficult to find rooms, and the search feature wasn't very evolved at that point. And so this was really the only way for people to find us as highly sensitive people. So again, if you are interested in these kind of conversations, make sure you're following the club. If anyone in the room resonates with you, make sure you give them a follow. But I personally want to just share, as far as boundaries go, this is something that I'm constantly learning about, educating myself, growing with. And one of the things that was really important to me in 2022, as we moved into this quote unquote post pandemic world, was really to approach my relationships with stronger boundaries and not assume that the other person can read my mind. That's not possible yet. I mean, it is energetically, intuitively. I think HSPs get that. But the expectation of boundaries really comes down to communication and action. It's not something that we create for ourselves and then expect other people to understand that. So I just want to get into that conversation and see what comes up for everyone, and um, how as HSPs we're really impacted by weak, rigid, and healthy boundaries in terms of emotional and intellectual boundaries. So that's a mouthful. I just want to really start too with the definition. I just pulled this off Google. So if you're wondering what I mean by emotional boundaries, this is what Google says. It says emotional boundaries. This is where we learn how to separate our feelings from other people's feelings. So our feelings should not depend on other people's thoughts, feelings, or moods. In this way, an emotional boundary is in most cases one that you set yourself. Emotional boundaries are violated when someone criticizes, belittles, or invalidates another person's feelings. Hello, gaslighting. Who hasn't had this as an HSP? Intellectual boundaries refers to thoughts and ideas. So, healthy intellectual boundaries include respect for others' ideas and awareness of appropriate discussion. Should we talk about the weather or politics? Intellectual boundaries are violated when someone dismisses or belittles another person's thoughts or ideas. So, that just gives you a little insight on those two particular boundaries that I want to discuss today with Joy and Kelly's help. And we'll just go ahead and get into this discussion. And if Joy and Kelly, if you just want to briefly introduce yourself and share anything that you feel is important to discuss before we get into the main meat of this discussion. I'll go ahead and mute myself and pass the mic.
All right, thank you. I'm Joy Seldon, and I am an emotional intelligence master trainer and coach and author of Emotions and Owner's Manual. So this topic is extremely important to me. In my work over the last number of years, I found that boundaries shows up as a need in every client I've had, every student. It's incredibly important. I learned the power of it in grad school. I went back to school when I was 50, and I have a master's in somatic counseling psychology. And in one of the classes, we had a guest teacher, and he had us do this exercise where there was a student who stood on one side of the room, and it was all open in the middle, very large, and he stood on the other side, and he walked very slowly towards the student, and the student didn't flinch until this teacher was right in front of his face. And the lesson was that this student had extremely rigid boundaries, very tight, close to the vest. He wasn't impacted by anything. And he asked for another volunteer, and I raised my hands like, I really want to do this exercise. And I'm standing on the opposite side of this big circle, and the teacher is standing sideways to me, and he turns towards me, and I flinch. And he said, your boundaries are way, way out. And I had no idea that the upsets and anger and all of the turmoil that I would go through over my neighbors and my friends and the world and politics, and I was reacting to everything because my boundaries, I maybe either had no boundaries or they were way, way out. And I learned in that moment and subsequently to work with my energetic boundaries and to be able to pull them in. And the first thing I did to practice was when I was in my car driving and I would be upset at other drivers. I'd be all angry. And I learned to use my car as my boundary, the edge of my boundaries. And as soon as I would think that, instantly my anger would dissipate. I would stop feeling anything and I would just come back into presence with myself. So that was the profound experience that I had that was so visceral about how we can actually work with energetic boundaries that I'm sure we will get into in the discussion today about how that connects to emotional boundaries and intellectual boundaries. And I find they are in the very expensive grad school that I went to, I'm still paying off. Uh, Boundaries, I say, is the most important, valuable lesson that I learned there. So I'm super excited for today and, in fact, the next coming weeks, this month, that we're going to be talking about this. I'm Joy, and I am complete.
This is Kelly, and I am an intuitive teacher for women. I am a spiritual coach. I help my clients to clear their emotional blockages, whether it be from traumas or just outdated beliefs, so that they can have healthier overall well being. I am a HSP, an empath, and I love this discussion because just like with you, Joy, this comes up in all of my sessions: boundaries, how they've been violated, or how a person doesn't feel like they have the ability to set them, telling people no, or standing up for themselves. So I just really do love this conversation because I think it is something that affects everyone. And if we can just learn how to become healthier in our boundaries. And I oftentimes tell my clients boundaries are not walls, they are gates. You can look over the gate, you can unlock the gate to let a person in, you can look over the gate to see if that person is safe enough to let in, but they are not walls. There needs to be a free flow of energy, even with a boundary. So I'm excited about this discussion. Let's dive in.
Yes, I love it. And I just want to pose a question to you both because I know you have a lot of expertise in this area, and also you're both HSPs. What do you think, um, or why do you think HSPs suffer from poor boundaries? Why is that a theme in having this trait?
I would say, this is Joy, I would say that, first of all, the sensitivity that we have. We're sensitive. We feel things on a visceral level. We're aware of things that other people aren't. And so there's the start of our capacity to be in touch with our surroundings and emotionally, physically, mentally, all of that. And we are not taught in our society, I would say, especially as women, um, but I think men have the same issue, especially sensitive men, but we're not taught that we have the right and the ability and the need to set boundaries. It's not part of our education, it's not part of the culture. And so we when you have rigid boundaries, then you have a barrier. I study Qigong, and there's a theme in, or a teaching of my Qigong teacher, that boundaries dissolve barriers. And we're used to setting up barriers to protect ourselves rather than boundaries. And I think that's the key, is that we're just not taught that we have the right um, and the skill of how to actually do that. This is Joy, and I'm complete.
This is Kelly. I totally agree with you, Joy. We are simply not educated in setting healthy boundaries. And with the HSP, empath, or anyone that is highly sensitive, because we have this urge to really be there and to feel, and we want to help. A lot of us are gifted in those areas, and we understand that we do serve other people, and sometimes that can be overextended because we're just wanting, our heart is so open, we're wanting to help people. We're wanting to help people regulate. We're wanting to help people, solve a problem. And in that way, our boundaries are simply just sometimes not there. I've had times where I didn't have any boundaries. I was so overwhelmed because I was doing so much. I was so depleted. I was so drained. And so, like I said, I agree with Joy. We're simply not taught to have healthy boundaries, and saying no almost makes us cringe because it's like, oh, will this person be okay if I say no? We're more concerned about what they're going to think about us saying no, as opposed to our overall health and our being overwhelmed and burnt out. This is Kelly, and I'm complete.
I love that, Kelly. And you're actually hitting on something that I wanted to talk about is, what is the result of not having boundaries? What does that look like? How do we know that we have weak boundaries or unhealthy boundaries? And I'm just going to read this little part here from the book. It says, boundaries are expectations and help you feel safe and comfortable in your relationships. They help you stay mentally and emotionally well. Nidra defines boundaries as a verbal or an action that you communicate to someone to feel safe, secure, and supported in a relationship. Often we think of boundaries as only verbal, but boundaries are also an action. A closed door is a boundary, it's a two-part process. So, not having boundaries can result in stress and burnout, what Kelly mentioned. And in the Nidra's first chapter, she explains some of the signs that come with not having boundaries. And that looks like neglecting self care, feeling overwhelmed, feeling resentment for being asked to help, avoidance of people, and so on. So, when we don't have boundaries, we are often unhealthy in our relationships. Sometimes the other person doesn't even know that we're struggling with this. We assume they should figure this out based on our behavior towards them or based on past conversation. Typically, the other person is unaware there is an issue. So I'm just curious if, and again, I can open this up to the rest of the room. I see we have a couple raised hands. You know, are you self-aware as an HSP what it looks like when you're not setting boundaries? What is that symptom inside of you? What is created from not having those boundaries? So that we can get clear on that, so that we know then we need to start looking at our boundary setting and making tweaks so that we can have a healthy relationship with ourselves and with others. So I'm going to go ahead and just bring up Savigne here. And if you want to answer that question, great. If there's something else you wanted to share, I'll go ahead and let you have the mic. Welcome. Good to see you. Savigne, would you like to share or do you have a question?
Oh, I'm sorry. Hi. Hi, Julie. Hi, Joy. Hi,
Hello.
hi, Kelly. Hi. Can you hear me well?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah, I to your question, what do we feel when am I getting the question correctly? What do we feel when we didn't set the boundary right? Is that the question?
Yes, you got it.
Yeah, I feel it in kind of steps. First, I get angry at the other person, of course, and later I will self blame myself for not setting boundary. And to the it depends on the intensity of the issue. Later, it can escalate to resentment, and that is so painful. That's very frustrating, very painful. That would be the experience of not setting boundaries. And on the other hand, when setting boundaries, in my culture, and I mean, brought up on this side of the world, Asian, um as a girl, we're supposed to be nice and obedient. So we when we set boundary to self-care, or to express our emotion, or to express our needs, or to express some kind of self-care, then we would sort of shame as selfish. So there's a punishment or penalty in terms of setting boundaries in the culture as well. um and that is so, when we are being when we don't set boundaries, is then painful, and a lot of resentment and anger. But when we set boundaries, there's also a punishment. Then that is sad, and and ending up another kind of anger as well. um so it's not easy, but it's doable. Then so I'll share later if our conversation carry on to that. Yeah, then that's to answer your first question, and this is Avani, and I'm complete. Thank you.
I think you brought up a really important point, that it can be both painful to set boundaries and then also painful to not set boundaries. So I'm just going to put this question out there. How do we balance that? How do we decide that that discomfort of not setting is more important than actually going through the action and verbalizing your needs to another person? How do we balance that? Because I think as highly sensitive people, that's often why we aren't setting boundaries, because it feels painful to set them, but yet then we sit in that pain of not setting them. So I would love to just hear anyone's thoughts on that.
This is Joy, and I think this is a really great point because we actually do other people a favor. We are giving them a gift by setting boundaries. We all need to have reflection from others. None of us are perfect. And in fact, I think my trying to be perfect, I was a hardcore perfectionist. And that came out of the fact that I had that sensitivity and I didn't know how to set boundaries. So I was just trying to be perfect. But the fact is that we're all just, it's a, it's messy being human, and we need reflection. And so when you set a boundary for another person, you are actually doing them a favor. And when I really got that, it made it so much easier. And then you be kind in how you do it. You be respectful and kind. But we all need others to reflect back to us, and we need people to set boundaries with us as well. So I think that there's an incredible value in setting a boundary for another person, and we do get misinformed to that we are not being nice or kind to a person when in fact it's the opposite.
This is Kelly. I totally agree with you, Julie, and Joy in regards to this, because the one thing about boundaries is that it puts up a stop for whatever's going on at the time. That boundary says, hold on, wait a minute, stop right here. It doesn't allow the free flow of another individual to come through, because you have become self-aware of who you are. You're more self-aware. And I think that is the thing that we have to focus on, especially as highly sensitive people. The more self-aware we are and the more we know ourselves, it actually makes it easier to set the boundary. It pulls us out of feeling pain when we set the boundary, because then we understand it's not our responsibility to overwhelm ourselves. And it's not our responsibility to help others so much that we overwhelm ourselves. And so for me, it just removes that pain point when I say, okay, these are my needs. And I need to make sure that even in everything that I do, that my needs are met. And it takes that. I like what Savinia said, even in regards to culture, because I have a ministry background. So we are taught, just continue to help, continue to overextend. It's better to give than it is to receive. So you're in this loop of helping, overextending, no boundaries. Anybody can come in. And then when you hit that burnout point, you already know why. And so to remove that pain point, that self-awareness is so very vital of just who you are, self-understanding, so that the boundaries protect you. It's not really for other people. It just kind of protects you from the constant overstimulation. This is Kelly. I'm complete.
Thank you so much, everyone, for being here. I'm Kimberly, and I just want to comment around all of this that, one of the biggest emotions that I feel when I'm not setting a boundary right um, is shame. Just pure and simple. And that manifests in a lot of different ways, but um, can be really hard to deal with. But I want to go back to what you, Joy and Kelly, were just talking about in regards to when you're setting a healthy boundary, that it creates a space in which you can it can hopefully create a space in which you can reside in a healthy atmosphere. You're creating that by setting the healthy boundary. And one of the things that I've experienced in my past is very clearly setting a healthy boundary, but then that other person not being able to handle what that means. And myself, therefore, being sort of just eventually ostracized from um, that person's life, the people that surround them. Um, and, it broke that unit. Um, and, when I was setting that healthy boundary, it was because that person had hurt me deeply and I needed to set some space between us, and they weren't happy with that. Anyway, so I just wanted to share about that and get your feedback and thoughts around that. But for sure, it puts me in a better place today. I would not change it for the world, because having that person in my life in that state was not healthy. And no matter what, no matter who's in my life today, they're healthy for me.
I love that. I want to hit on 2 points here. Something that you brought up, Kimberly, and also what Kelly said. One, I think it's really important, if you want to establish boundaries, if you want to have healthy relationships, it's know thyself, know your needs, what's important to you. How do you need to protect your time and energy so that you have time and energy for your needs and your priorities, so that when something comes up against that, you know and are clear about how to protect that. So I think that's a really important point. And then to note what you said, Kimberly, about when we set those boundaries, how is the other person reacting to us and our boundary setting? And I just wanted to add something that was brought up in the book. It says, when you see boundaries through communication and action, so you're actually setting in place verbal or action to communicate those boundaries, what you can get from the other person is pushback, limit testing, ignoring, rationalizing and questioning, defensiveness, ghosting, silent treatment, and acceptance. So, what I want to say about that is when you put those boundaries in place, your signals, your, I guess, what is coming across to the other person, how that other person is either verbalizing or their actions, noticing that, will then allow you to either continue to finesse the boundary tweaking, or it will show up in a way that you know that this individual is not respecting your boundaries, they're not listening, and maybe reevaluate that relationship. And I know that that's not just with friendships, that's with family, and that can be really difficult. So I'm just going to say, when we get that kind of pushback or maybe disrespect to what we're sharing, how do we know when setting the boundaries leads us to exiting a relationship or creating rigid boundaries until that person gets it? How do we look at that in a way that is taking care of our needs, but also not assuming the other person knows what our needs are, but again, setting those intentions to communicate and have actions behind it and being consistent about it? How do we get there?
This is Kelly. I think, the biggest thing here is you have to look at everything on an individual basis. There may be an individual that you have to set really rigid boundaries with, but you also have to, I typically put a time frame on those rigid boundaries, because what ultimately happens is if you set rigid boundaries and you don't revisit that to see if it is healthy enough to allow this person in my space, then they could keep those rigid boundaries forever and you never reassess that situation. It still doesn't promote a healthy connection. So ultimately you want to have a healthy connection, and you want to make sure, because in healthy connections you don't have to have a rigid boundary, because they're two people respecting each other's boundaries. A rigid boundary comes about when someone has violated, and that is the consequence of the boundary of you violating the boundary. I have to get more rigid, and I have to show you that my needs are important. But when you still don't acknowledge that importance, then I have to decide, okay, is it healthy enough to keep you in my space? Or do I need to kind of shift you to maybe an associate category? Or do I need to totally shift you out of my life? And I think it happens individually, as we relate to one another, depending upon who the other individual is that you're dealing with. This is Kelly. I'm complete.
I like everything that's been said. This is Joy, Kelly. That I think we have to make choice about ourselves. And one of the things that um, I really got that was profound for me through my qigong teacher, when she has a book called The Way of Joy. Her name's Vicky Della Gioio, and she says that I'm just going to read a short thing. That your boundaries contain the space within which you define who you are and how you express yourself in the world. The clearer you are about this self knowing, the less you will find yourself barricaded or suppressed by power struggles, defensiveness, and alienation. Once freed in this way, you will be able to express yourself in fresh, unimpeded, and limitless ways. We are here to express the fullness of who we are. And so we need space in which to do that. And that's one of the gifts of being able to set these boundaries, emotional, energetic boundaries with people, is that it provides a space so we can actually function as our best self. So that's one thing. And I do want to address what Kimberly, what you said about shame, that there's two kinds of shame. One is toxic shame, which is a belief that there's something fundamentally wrong with me. And that's a lie, basically. It's a false belief. And then there's remorse. And that's, I'm not perfect. I've done an action that I made a mistake, and I take responsibility for it. I own it, and I feel bad about it. So part of this thing around feeling shame is to really recognize, is this a healthy shame or a toxic shame that's really based on a false belief? So that sometimes gives a guidance to where that emotion is coming from. This is Joy, and I'm complete.
I love that. And I'm curious to know, Kimberly, how Joy's definition of shame, how does that land with you? Do you see it a little differently?
I'm sorry, can you repeat it?
Yeah, I was just saying, I love Joy's explanation of shame. And I was wondering, as you had brought up that as something you were experiencing, did her definition of the way that you can see shame, did that bring up anything for you?
As far as like compared to a remorseful, kind of healthier shame.
Yeah, or just anything, if that resonated with you. I don't want to put you on the spot.
Yeah, just
Yeah.
since you said it, it made you feel shame. I think
Mhm.
she's asking, did it clarify what your experience was at that time?
Well, I definitely think that there's a lot of different, I guess, types of shame or layers of shame. Um, the Yeah, it's an interesting. I'm sorry, I'm not. My dog is attacking my fingers. um,
That's okay. I didn't want to put you on the spot. I just thought that was a really, when I listen to Joy talk about the word shame and how we can look at it, it gives me a sense of relief. And so it just, again, that wiring that there's always something wrong with us. What's wrong with us? That is a common reel that is in the head of an HSP. And so I love her definition of shame and how we can look at it to kind of move away from that self-deprecating mode of operation.
yeah, for sure, for sure, I agree.
So one of the things I also wanted to bring up, that Nidra is so well rehearsed, is talking about how we communicate about boundaries. I'm sure we can think back to different times when we felt a boundary violation, or we felt an emotional reaction to something, and we may have had an inner thought, and maybe we even verbalized that, and maybe we weren't in a grounded place to really talk about it in the moment. And so she gives us some very direct communication on how to communicate around boundaries. So I'm just going to read this little section. It says, communicating boundaries in an aggressive, passive aggressive, or manipulative manner is not a good way to communicate boundaries. Assertiveness is the correct way. And then she has a chapter that goes over a step by step guide on how to be assertive and effectively communicate your boundaries. It also talks about what to avoid when setting boundaries. So you don't want to apologize for setting boundaries. I think that's a huge thing. Um, and you don't want to say too much. You just want to be assertive, clear, and direct. And I think taking away some of that emotional reaction is really, really key. So I'm just curious if this is something that you've mastered as an HSP. Is this something that has kind of come up in your day to day, and where do you notice you yourself communicating about your boundaries, and how do you communicate your boundaries, in what way do you feel that you can be assertive, or is this something that you're still working on or exploring for yourself?
Hi. Joy, you want to say
Go
something?
ahead. Go ahead. I'll speak after.
Thank you. Um, I just did one one of the setting boundary today. Um, Someone asked me to do something, and I have already clearly said no, like a month ago, and today she came back again, and yeah, it seems like my verbal communication didn't work. It's just N and O, and it didn't work. The person came back and with a yeah, guilt tripping, and I noticed that is a guilt tripping, and I still say no. And I said something like, yeah, you 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 might not be pleased, but I'm still saying no. And that's it. And I have learned to not having to justify myself. I said, I feel sorry that you are upset. I am saying no, and that's it. And that's how I did it. And to your earlier question of whether how do we tell whether our setting boundary is the right one or it is correct, I'm not sure whether there's a right or wrong in this sense. Then I, as an SSP, I trust my nerve, and I mean physical nerve. So if I said it right, I can feel that my nerve is so relaxed and relieved. If I don't set it right or I didn't set it, my nerve is so overwhelmed. It tells that like nerve always saves us. I will say we will thanks our nerves for that. So that's how I tell myself as that's the signal whether I said it right. And then what I learned, my tips is that I think we all deserve not having to justify ourselves as long as we know our thy selves. This is Savani and I'm complete.
I love that. This is Joy. I love that. And that's something I had to learn. And my husband was very good at helping me. You don't have to explain, you don't have to justify your choice. You can just say no, thank you, or no. And I do, in terms of Julie, your question, it's a big practice does help. And it took me time. It was very difficult at first. And but in time I've learned that it's very to trust it, to trust my instinct, to trust that intuition, to say no thanks or sorry to interrupt. And that's another part of setting boundaries. When someone is saying something to you that you don't agree with, or I've had like teachers or coaches in programs that are like, or somebody who's trying to sell me something is like, sorry to interrupt, but I just know what you're saying is not going to work for me. And with kindness and lightness, but I really trust that instinct now, and I found it got much easier over time. It's Joy, and I'm complete.
Joy, I like what you just said. Even when something is being explained and you know it's not gonna work for you, because this is the key here. We know early on what's not gonna work and what is gonna work. And sometimes we sit silently listening to something that isn't gonna work, and we know it isn't gonna work because we don't want to just flat out tell them no. But kind of like what Sauvignon said, you have to kind of give that no and without an explanation, because the explaining means you're trying to make them feel good about you saying no, when in truth we should feel good about the no, because the no is for us. It is not necessarily for them. They want the yes. So, when we're looking at these boundaries and we're looking at what our needs are, it is really key to get back to that feel good space. When I know my boundaries have been crossed and I yield, I immediately feel it in the body. Immediately feel it. And there have been times I've had to go back to people and say, you know what? I said this, or I took this on, or whatever the situation is, and I have to rework it. And then when I rework it, I get back to that feel good space again. I can always feel it. My body is always my messenger. And I can always feel when there's a violation, or even when I have violated my own boundaries, because that can happen as well, where we violate our own boundaries, and that inconsistency is seen by others, so they feel like they can violate them as well. This is Kelly. I am complete.
Kelly, I really like what you said. I'm sorry, Julie. Um, I really like what Kelly said, that sometimes we violate our own boundaries as well. I experience as an HSP, sometimes non-consciously I do dumb down myself in order to feel belong in whatever relationship that is, and it's like paying a membership fee to such a relationship, and to the point where I feel, well, this is too expensive to pay. I cannot pay this membership fee anymore, and that's when I know that, oh my God, I forgot to set my boundary. And yeah, that's me allowing my boundary to be violated. And yeah, thank you, Kelly, for bringing that up. And yeah, I should be more mindful about that. Thank you. This is Savani, and I'm complete.
Oh, I love that. That you're the fee about paying the too high a fee. That's brilliant. This is something that I've actually gotten more and more aware of and working with people in terms of the internal boundaries, because we can be so hard on ourselves. So hard on ourselves, especially as an HSP, when you feel like you don't fit in and other people don't get you, and you somehow didn't get what you wanted. We blame ourselves, and so it's really really important to be conscious of and learning how to set internal boundaries so that we hold that space of our sacredness inside of us and not let the ego voice or the inner critic or the inner judge come in and demean us. So thanks for bringing that up, Kelly. I'm Joy and I'm complete.
And this is Julie. I wanted to invite Lisa to share, but she may be in a poor connection area. So if she pops back up here on stage, I'll pass the mic to her. But I love that boundaries with yourself was brought up, because I think, again, that kind of goes back to knowing yourself and knowing what your needs are, and then having that healthy relationship. And as an HSP, we really have to focus on a deep level of self-compassion, because I agree with you. I think it was Joy that said we are really good at being hard on ourselves. And that was something, when I did learn about this trait much later in life, I can kind of review how I interacted with myself and others, and through that boundary setting, and how weak it was, because I was just this very porous person who was always taking in everyone else's energy. I was in conflict with what I wanted to create for myself. And then I felt those pressures to conform and to be received in a positive way. So I would constantly flex and bend those boundaries. So I didn't really have a clear, established set of boundaries for myself, which made me feel safe. It was really dependent on everyone else outside of myself, and kind of reaching their level of comfort versus my own. So I think that is really, really key as HSPs, to notice when we are violating our own self boundaries, and really look at that root of that problem. And maybe there's a common, observation that you can make, and maybe it's just with that particular person or that particular situation. One of the other things that I've always said as an HSP, and I've gotten really good at this as being someone that's been self-employed for the majority of my life, but when someone asks something of me and I give away my time and energy, I get really clear about what I'm giving away. So if I am uncertain when someone comes to me that it's not a heck yes, it's not a gut response that says, yes, I want to do that, I always let the other person know. Let me sleep on it. Let me get back to you next week. Let me look at my schedule and see if I have the space and time to honor that commitment. And Kelly brought it up too. Maybe we say yes in the moment and we have that realization, oh, I really don't have the space and time to make that commitment. And you can start to see or notice how that feels in your body. And I think that's the gift of being energetically connected to yourself as a highly sensitive person. We really can notice the sensations. We can notice where it feels in our body, and those are those signals that we need to pay attention to that allow us to tweak those boundaries and take action and verbalize our needs, and also go slower in saying yes to things. And I think that's another thing HSPs really need to get grounded about, is that we live in a society that's go, 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 and you need to respond quickly. Everyone wants instant gratification, and we just need to learn to slow down, really check in with ourselves, check in with our schedule. And if it's not a heck yes, it might be a no that you need to really get clear about, and honor that, and really know that it's safe and important for you to take that time and allow time for that decision to kind of marinate, so that when you can verbalize it, you're in a very clear state about that commitment and how it feels in your body, and whether it's something you really want to do or not. So I think that's really important as HSPs. I don't know if you guys want to chime in on any of that, or if you have something else you want to share. I'll go ahead and mute myself.
Julie, when you said the word safe, it just kind of went all through me, because I think that's the thing we don't think about. That when we violate our own boundaries, or when someone else violates our own boundaries, with me and my body, it feels like there's a lack of safety. And so I immediately have a response in the body, because the safety that I've created with my boundaries, I'm no longer safe. And I think it is a wonderful safety if you just use the just use the fact that my safety boundary is being challenged. That is enough to get you back on track, get you back in that space of I'm comfortable again, because we deny our own comfort trying to make others comfortable. And especially as HSPs and empaths, as feelers, as sensitive, highly sensitive people, we tend to think of others' comfort first, and we really do need to think of our comfort first. And it is not a selfish act. We've all been taught that, oh, it's just selfish for you to, you know, think of yourself first. It actually isn't. We're being self aware. We're honoring our values, honoring our needs, honoring our safety threshold. And in that way, we show up healthier, because I'm not at my best if I violated boundaries, allowed other people to violate boundaries. I think Savier said it. You start to feel resentment. You start to, feel angry that, you're kind of have it's wide open in your life, without any structures to really corral your needs and corral your values so that they're always met. This is Kelly. I am complete.
Uh, this is Joy, and this brings up the definition that I hold for anger, and the way I view anger is when your life is, you've all heard of fight or flight. Those are the basic emotions, are fear and anger, and they are our protector emotions. When your life is directly threatened, the fight or flight instinct kicks in, and that can help save your life. In our interactions with people and the normal day-to-day interactions, when anger comes up, it is a boundary setter. Its basic message is no. So I would get angry all the time because I didn't have healthy regular boundaries, so I was using anger to be my boundary setter. It's that energy that comes up and just says, stop, no, this is not okay with me, I don't like this or want this, whatever that message is. And so part of my education around boundary setting was to be really attuned to those early stages of the anger, of feeling, which for me is heat. I start to feel hot inside. And then I was like, oh, now I'm angry. And what is it? It's setting a boundary. Well, what is the boundary I'm setting? A lot of times it is, on the outside. It's other people or things or circumstances, what have you. And sometimes that anger comes up because I'm mad at myself. And there's an internal boundary that needs to be set, or a recognition that I have not been in alignment with myself in a certain situation. So I just wanted to throw that piece in. This is Joy, and I'm complete.
I love that. I think when you were sharing, something that came up for me is I think it's really difficult, and I know this will be something Kelly can chime into, is that when we are setting boundaries inside our family unit or inside the home, and I'm not just talking energetic boundaries, but actually established boundaries. Like when I do a clubhouse room, I have to shut my door, I have to be in my room, I have to be undisturbed. There are certain things that, I would tell my partner, please don't interrupt me unless the house is on fire, because it's extremely hard for me to focus with that kind of distraction. And so those are different boundaries that I've had to communicate with him. But I also have a partner, and I'll just tell some of my personal situation here, who has epilepsy, who has had many concussions. So, one of the things that really trips me up as a highly sensitive person is working with an individual, my partner, who I love and care for deeply. But because I am always verbalizing my boundaries, he's not always able and capable of remembering those boundaries. And so I find myself often irritated, angry, emotionally reacting to that situation. And I feel really helpless. And I feel that I am dealing with a situation. It's not his fault for having, several concussions that deplete his short term memory. And also, just, epilepsy is one of those things that I don't necessarily fully understand, and we haven't gotten a lot of support with. But I just want to bring up that topic of the in home boundary setting, because I know Kelly, by choice, chooses to not live with other people, which then allows her to have that safety, that like bubble that is your safety home sanctuary, where you don't have to establish, verbalize, or communicate boundaries. They are your boundaries that you have with yourself. But how do we navigate boundaries with other personality types, other energies that we actually live in the physical home with as highly sensitive people? So we already know that we're susceptible to the energetic boundary merging, and getting clear about, what that looks like for you and what is being interrupted. and the kind of damage that it creates. So I'm just curious if anyone has some insights on how to better take care of ourselves in our home unit when we're engaging and interacting with other people and other personality types and energetically at different levels. I just wanted to offer that as a question.
This is Joy, and I'm just as like a really important topic for me and a major change in my life. When I got married at 45, because that's how long it took me to be able to have the kind of relationship I wanted, um, I happened to go into therapy shortly after that for other reasons. And my therapist recommended talk time. So the first several years of our marriage, my husband and I had talk time once a week. Sunday mornings, it kind of became our church. And we made agreements, and this is something I had learned in another setting about having agreement. This is the thing that creates safety, and this speaks to some things that Kelly, you said earlier, that speaks to safety is you have agreement with the person to what is the level of expression that you have with that person. Now, how much of your emotions can you express? You can talk about them. You can say, well, we can talk about our emotions, but you can't express the full energy of it because I don't feel safe. Or it's okay to express the full energy of it if you ask permission first. That's what my husband and I did. So if one of us was going to be angry at the other one, we would ask permission, can I express my anger? And so we would be prepared and we would give permission. And we created a protocol for communicating with each other. And sometimes it was like I'd be so scared, I felt like I was going to die from fear because there was something I had to say to my husband about his behavior or something I didn't like or didn't want. And we learned during that time by expressing ourselves, by communicating in a way that was safe, that we built this tremendous sense of trust. And it took time, but it's like it was revolutionary to me. And one of my spiritual teachers once said that you only need one person in your life like this, but if you have one person where you can express the full energy of your emotions, then that you have a place where you can be yourself completely. And so by having that permission with my husband and being able to express that, what I found out is that there were times when I'd be angry when he would say, yes, you're right, I apologize, I was, I was wrong or whatever. And then there were times when I expressed the full energy of my anger and I go, oh, it's me, it's my stuff. I was projecting things onto you, or I was in my own ego about this. And so we learned not only about each other, but we learned about ourselves by having this space. And so if you're in a relationship, or you have close friendships, if you act, and this is something we never do. It's just crazy that we don't talk about how we can communicate with each other. In families, I never had that in my family. I grew up just completely thinking I was a heavy introvert, which I'm not, because I didn't feel safe speaking up in my family. Not because I would get hit or anything, but emotionally it wasn't safe. And so we don't talk about how we're going to be in relationship with each other in these very important relationships that we have. I'm Joy and I'm complete.
This is Kelly. Oh, I love what you said, Joy. And the thing is, I think communication is key. Um, when you are, cohabitating and there is another person, there has to be communication. If there's anything that may inhibit the ability even to remember those things, it may be something where you have certain reminders. The reminder is not um, to, for lack of better words, make the person feel small, but the reminder is just to reiterate what the boundary is. but you can do reminders that you're not saying out of your mouth, whether it be a sticky note, whether it be anything that gives that person, that triggers that person, oh, this is one of the boundaries. This is things that I need to pay attention to. Because I think what exacerbates us is when we're constantly having to say it over and over and over. I personally do not like repeating myself, but so many times. So there, it may be time to get creative in setting that boundary. And like I said, if it's nothing but a note on the bathroom mirror, when the person is brushing their teeth, they look up, they see it. That may trigger that memory of that boundary, because we as HSPs and empaths, we can't go but so long with our boundaries being violated, or we move from fight and we go to flight. We remove ourselves from that situation. After we stop being angry and resentful, it's like, okay, this is just not worth it anymore. I'm just going to totally remove myself. And so you have to find a creative way in whomever you're dealing with to communicate that boundary. And so much so that you don't have to always say it. And like I said, it is so many different ways that it can be communicated. And especially in your situation, Julie, where there is a health issue that it has affected memory. So there are what it will be the equivalent to someone who has had a head trauma. My youngest son, he had a very bad concussion when he was in seventh grade. He got hit. He playing football, and when he went backwards, his head banged against the ground. Of course, he had his helmet on, but he is 22 now and still has the memory effect of that concussion. It may last a lifetime, but he's having to really find creative ways to deal with those effects, whether it be memory. It increases anxiety. His anxiety was upticked after that concussion. So there are different things that we have to do, depending upon who we're dealing with and what they have going on. But there are creative ways we could do it so that aren't far spent with constant repetition or repeating it and feeling like this person hasn't heard me. We just have to be more creative about how we communicate it. This is Kelly, and I'm complete.
Hi, this is Savani. Thank you, Joy. Thank you, Kelly. Yeah, I do agree that we communication is the key. I think most of the time with friends, it's easier to do a verbal communication, but when it comes to family, it's getting more difficult. Sometimes verbal communication is not welcome. Um, so a non-verbal is something that we, yeah, as Kelly mentioned, that we need to get creative. And what I found useful is that we have to sort of, I think every of us needs training. It's like conditioning it. Like if there's yeah, another person needs our help, but then as an SSP, we all know that space is really really important to us. So when boundary is being violated, it's is the same, I mean, aka our space is being taken up, and that's painful for HSP. We all know that. So in that sense, I would create my space when I'm not ready to support the other person. Let's say the other person is asking for help. I might say something like, yeah, I'll we can do that. Let's say the following days, or can we talk about this tonight or later? So that is to give me my space that I need at that time. It's not like I'm totally rejecting him or her, but then I need my space at that time, because we're talking about biological nerves and physical. That's what we need to survive. So that, I think, that's come to self-care. And um yeah, I think it's come to space. And in terms of this is we're talking about in-house, and on a daily basis, I would really encourage for us all to give ourselves the space time. I call it a me time. I would do that. I need to go for a walk in the greens, and that's to sort of stock up my space energy, so that when it's get to the domestic interaction, then I have more energy to to be to be burned or to be used interacting with the others. And we are talking about those people who we care. Then we need to stock up our energy, and when we feel that our energy is deprived, then we need to postpone, we need to delay our our empathy to them. And that's what I find helpful. That, yeah, easier said than done. We all have to do some kind of our experiment and see what works. And there's no right or wrong. I think whatever works, it works. This is Sawani, and I'm complete.
This is Julie. I just loved everything that's been shared here. One of the things that I just want to kind of bullet point is I love that Joy brought up having an established time and a rhythm, something that you're doing once a week to talk about your boundaries, and then also asking permission to feel the feelings instead of imposing those feelings on another person, I think is huge. I mean, that's really important. And I think we all could use some practice with that, because it is so easy to feel and project that, but to be consciously slow and ask for permission, I think is so key, because then you are establishing safety for one another, so that you're not just ripping into your partner, or coming from a place like Savigny said, sometimes we need to go and take care of our energy first. We need to establish that me time, so that we have that conversation and can show up in a way that allows us to be grounded through the conversation, still be able to express ourselves, our needs, our feelings and emotions and thoughts about it, but we're not coming from such a depleted state. Our bandwidth is wider, which will allow us to have a healthier conversation. So I think that was another great point. And then to Kelly's point about getting creative, I think as HSPs, we already know that we have to be creative about our lifestyle. We have to think about our life in a creative way, because it doesn't look like the majority. And so, through that practice of awareness, what is it that I can create that brings this bridge of communication into a better flow state, so that I don't have to repeat my boundaries over and over again? Because just like you, Kelly, I get super irritated when I have to repeat myself, because I feel like I'm very clear and direct about my needs. I've been given this wonderful opportunity to be single for a decade of my life, all of my 30s, which gave me that ability to really know myself. And so when I'm in my relationship, I feel I'm very clear. But again, I need to get creative with those different bullet points of how my partner and the people I live with, the person I live with, how we can better communicate in a way that isn't damaging to one another. Because I can be very insensitive in my communication. So that is definitely something I need to personally work on. Um, and then also recognizing that, when we're living inside a home, when we have these family units, to just constantly be exercising that communication, doing it from a place of groundedness, and then getting those creative steps in that allow us to kind of let go of having to constantly put those boundaries in place. So I just wanted to kind of sum that up. Um, and we have about 15 minutes here. I don't know if Joy and Kelly, if you're able to stick around for that long, but I would love to kind of just end the room today with any sort of tools or practices or any tips that you might have when it comes to establishing our boundaries. And even if it's just something we've already mentioned, if we just want to kind of end the room with a few of those ideas, I would love to hear from anyone in the audience as well. If you want to come up on stage and share anything, reflect anything, we'll stick around for about 15 minutes.
This is Joy, and I work a lot with the energetic boundaries. So I do qigong, and there's an exercise or a movement called Wei Qi, and it's just about, and you can do it with your imagination, which is just to sense we are energetic beings, and we have a life force that runs through us. It's called qi in certain areas, certain arts, and this qi that runs through us, this is, I view it as, the source. We're all made from source, divine spirit, whatever you want to call it, but it's this life force that runs through us. And we all have heard of auras. There's a Carillion, I think it's called Carillion photography, where they've actually photographed the energetic waves that come off of people, and we can sense this energy that is around us. And if you've done any kind of martial arts or qigong or tai chi, you've worked with this kind of energy. So working with energy, any kind of practice like that, is very beneficial. But with this, it's a sensing that there is a bubble around you. This energy goes out 2 or 3 feet, and that you can actually sense the boundaries of this energy. And there's a movement where you simply sweep your arms kind of in an arc in front of you, crossing in front of you and over your head. So you're making circles with your arms, basically, that defines this arc around your space. And I actually have learned to work just with my imagination of sensing this space around me. And when I am overly reacting to something that happens in the world or elsewhere with my life, then I pull this energy in. I could feel it getting very upset about what's going on in Ukraine, that things that I can't do anything about personally, that I just pull this energy in and sense it as a bubble around me and sense the tangibleness of this. And so when I get overly stressed, then I will pull this energy in and with my imagination sense this energy around me. And sometimes I will imagine that there's a reflective coating on the outside, sorry, so that any energy that's coming towards me will just bounce off of that. And then I sense my own space, expansion of my body and the energy around me filling up my personal space. I also teach an exercise with clients about with you're going to have a difficult conversation with someone or you're with someone who triggers you, to imagine a fence between you and that person, but it doesn't go over your head, so that you still can see the person, but that it comes up and at least covers your solar plexus, because energy comes and goes through the solar plexus. So if you imagine this fence and that they're on the other side of it, it's remarkable. I've taught this to many thousands of people, and everybody seems to have a sense of safety and relaxation in their body when you just picture this fence between you and the other person, so that you're creating an energetic barrier. That's the first thing that comes to mind. It's Joy, and I'm complete.
This is Kelly. And everything that Joy said, I piggyback off of. And one of the things that I think is really important in this discussion that we've had today is just communication and valuing your needs. What it's going to take for you to feel safe, what it's going to take for you to feel heard, what it's going to take for you to be seen, and to be consistent. The boundaries that you set for others, make sure that you're not violating them yourself. And boundaries can always be revisited. What you may feel like you really need today, 3 months from now, you may need to adjust that boundary. It's okay to adjust it. But ultimately, as highly sensitive people, boundaries are not something we can ignore. We're going to need to pay attention to them and make sure that we are in a space where we can honor ourselves even while we are helping and relating to others. This is Kelly. I am complete.
I love that. And I really appreciate those practical steps and different ways of thinking about it. And I loved what you shared about just that visualization you created for yourself. It just is something that when you were sharing, I was really able to use my imagination and see that and create that for myself. And one of the things that came up for me is also just the power of law of attraction. So if we know we're going to have a difficult conversation, we can even visualize the conversation in our mind, the way that we want to speak, the way that we want that person to react, and how we can create that situation in our head as a positive experience instead of taking on that fear or anxiety around having the actual conversation. So I think that's a really helpful way to put our nervous system at ease, is to just imagine, how do we want this conversation to resolve itself? How do we see the possibility of what can be created versus reacting from a place of fear, of thinking, well, I know this person is going to react this way. And then you create a whole story that turns into a whole panic. And then you don't want to have the conversation. So I think also just visualizing what it is that you want that situation to look like can also help you enter that conversation in a way that makes you feel more safe and at ease, and coming at it from a place of energetic boundary of, this is how I want to resolve this. I want to feel grounded. I want to feel peace when I communicate my needs. So I think as HSPs, we're really good at tapping into that imagination component and that idea of creating what we want to see versus basing it on the fear of what we might actually get by entering that conversation. So I'll go ahead and let Christopher speak here. I know you just popped up here on stage, so
I
I'll
just
go
want
ahead
to
and
pour
pass
into
the mic.
Kelly and your conversation real quick, if I may, Julie.
Go ahead.
Um, yeah, yeah. As highly sensitive people, we have to start with make sure we're grounded for sure. But also about the conversation that Kelly was talking about, I find it beneficial to start with something that I'm emotive to.
Christopher, we're kind of losing you. Are you in a bad spot?
Uh, I'm freaking. I got a red bar again. Dang it. I'll interject
I
later.
can hear you now. I
I
can
got a
hear
red
you
bar.
now.
So, but basically, what I was saying is just like, oh, you can? Okay. Well, I'll finish my thought real quick. Um, bookend it. It's like start with something that it's like you have an intention of what you want to speak about the individual, but you start with a positive aspect and end with a positive aspect. but the meat with potatoes are in the middle. You know what I mean? So to speak. I mean, I could give you examples, but that was really important. But the only way we can pour into others is if we take care of the groundwork first. That's what I was wanting to say to Kelly.
Got it, Christopher.
Thank you. And I think, again, I love the idea of bookends. I think that's, again, another visualization for us to kind of put our mind at ease, starting with something positive, ending with something positive, I think is another way to just kind of soften a little bit and approach the conversation and realize this other person that we're speaking to is human and we're all messy humans and we all deserve the opportunity to um, share what we need, but also do it from a place that is still connected to the heart. So I really appreciate what you shared, Christopher. I know Kelly had to hop off at this point, and so we'll go ahead and close down the room here. But I just wanted to say thank you to everyone for being here. I know that this is a really rich, deep topic, and we could talk about so many different angles about boundaries and boundary setting and violations. I was going to do a series of this, but I may switch things up. So the calendar is still not established. I am working on that. But they will be held on Thursdays at 11 a.m. Central. Just a reminder, this weekend is the time change. So be mindful of your energy, your time. Have some strong boundaries about what you do this weekend and the activities that you schedule in the week that follows the time change. Because as HSPs, we're really sensitive to that shift, and it is a very jarring change, even though it seems like it wouldn't necessarily be the case. I know I'm deeply impacted by time change. So be mindful of your boundaries that week after and keep your weekend light and full of self-care and sleep as much as you need. I'm giving you permission to take a nap.
Hmm.
So anything that anyone here on stage would like to end with, I'll give you guys a second here to respond. Otherwise, we'll go ahead and close the room and check back to the HSP Club. I will be adding rooms here, I would say, by the weekend at the latest. So thanks again for being here. Thanks for everyone in the audience who was just listening. And again, the replay will be available inside Clubhouse and also on YouTube. And if you haven't yet checked out this book, I highly recommend it. I have a link here on the top. I was just so moved by this author, and she just had some really great, straightforward advice. So that was also the basis of this conversation and different little bullet points that I extracted from that book. So I just wanted to mention her again. So I'll go ahead and mute myself. And if anyone else has any final words, I'll give you space to do so.
It's Joy, and I just want to say thank you for making this a topic. I think it's a crucial topic for everyone in the world, and the more that HSPs gain the skill, the awareness and skill of setting healthy boundaries, and as Kelly said in the beginning, it's a gate, not a wall. So that to know when it's flexible, to know what you let in and what you let out and keep out, and that the world would be a much better place. We would have healthy boundaries instead of violent. But anyway, don't get me started. But anyway, thank you so much. Always a pleasure. Just love this space. It's very always enlightening for me as well. I'm Joy, and I'm complete.
Okay, I was leaving space for I can't pronounce your name. I'm sorry. If you want to go, you can right now. But um, I am grateful for Julie and holding these spaces. I'm grateful for being authentic, and I'm gonna carry that into my path going forward and into my day. And that's, I guess, my closing thought.
Thank you, Joy. Thank you, Christopher. I appreciate it. Thanks for being here and showing up and being part of the conversation. Um, I just love you guys, and I can't tell you how transformative it is to have these weekly conversations and learning from each other. Even though we're all HSPs, we come at this life experience from many different angles and perspectives. So I appreciate and value each of your individual perspectives, and I appreciate you coming to stage and sharing those perspectives. So thanks again for being here, and I hope everyone has a wonderful, beautiful day. I'll see you guys next week.
Namaste.